Welcome everybody to our Future Teacher Reborn series. For those that are new to Future Teacher, we've run many of these topics as kind of 19 or more in total for a number of years now. And originally we had the series, and then we had the reactivated session, and we're currently up to the reborn session. I'm not quite sure what kind of analogy we're going to come to for the next running of all the topics, but anyway, today we're on the designing and creating online learning activities topic. We leave the registration form open until the end of the session because people sign in late, and then you'll see an accordion pane here that welcomes you to the session and the details of each of our guest speakers, some links to related resources, and then a panel that's what next. If you explore the drop down menu of this, you'll see that as well as this reborn page, we've run this topic 2 or 3 times before, so designing, creating online learning, and you'll see all the recordings and all the resources that we've used in those previous sessions. So there's a rich mix of resources available, and different guest speakers for each session. So that's the resource. We'll put the link in the text chat because I know it doesn't show for people that have only just signed in, and we'll get started with the introduction and today's speakers. I'll stop sharing my screen. And who's introducing our first speaker?
Okay, I'm going to introduce the first speaker. Our first speaker today is Dr. Dylan Jones, who is the Programme Lead in Biomedical Science in Bangor University. Dylan's talk is going to talk about the transformative potential of artificial intelligence in education, focusing on the role of chatbots in enhancing learner engagement. And he's going to examine how conversational AI can provide personalised support, foster critical thinking, and create accessible learning environments. So over to Dylan. Diolch, Dylan.
Diolch, Sian. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for the opportunity to talk here today. As Sian mentioned, I'm a programme lead for biomedical science at Bangor, although today I'm in sunny Aston University. So if there are technical issues, please forgive me. I'm in unfamiliar surroundings with an unfamiliar computer. So as Sian mentioned, the topic of my discussion is going to be around the use of chatbots, particularly with regards to elements of the biomedical science curriculum. And we'll talk through a few examples through this presentation. As a bit of preamble, just to kind of explain what chatbots are and the types of chatbot that we've been using. We're fortunate in that Blackboard, which is the virtual learning environment that we use at Bangor, now has AI-powered chatbot functionality built in, although there are, of course, other AI tools that can be used as to power, to kind of fuel chatbots. ChatGPT, which is the kind of almost synonymous one that when most of us think of AIs. And I think kind of to answer the question, why now? Certain chatbots have been used for a long time. I mean, if you've tried getting customer support for anything for the last few years, most of these have been chatbots, although they haven't really been maybe as sophisticated as we would require them in education. And with the development of AI algorithms, AI technology over the last kind of couple of years, certainly, we're starting to see that many of these chatbots are now starting to become sophisticated enough to be used within education. They have a number of advantages. Certainly the ones in Blackboard that we use are fairly easy to set up. I'll show some pictures later on of what that looks like. So the time investment required for teaching staff is minimal. It's integrated within the VLE. So again, the learning curve for learners having to adapt to new systems just isn't present. And these tools, and I'll talk about specific examples later on, are designed and developed in ways that allow the student, the learner, to be able to take these tools, these links, work through them in their own pace, work through them in maybe an environment that they're more comfortable in, any time of the day. And these devices can help with providing feedback if students get stuck, if a particular aspect of a case study or the module as a whole is challenging to them. The chatbots can be used to kind of provide some additional context, some additional hints. So immediate feedback, immediate opportunities for students to kind of question their own knowledge, and also for students to kind of push past perhaps some of the content that we've covered in our learning with them, and to develop new links, new ideas. Given that across teaching at all different levels, we're all exceptionally busy and expectation of work is increasing annually. Personally, I find that many of these chatbots, because they're a relatively small time investment in setting up and can then be quite robust once they've set up, they can be a remarkably efficient use of an educator's time. Now, when it comes to chatbots, again, in HE, we are certainly in the North Wales Medical School fairly new adopters, particularly of the version that's embedded within Blackboard. We have, however, seen, and I'll talk a bit about this towards the end, we've seen some remarkably quick kind of returns on our investment, as it were. These haven't come without their challenges, and there are barriers. I'll mention those in a second. But for the students who have been using them, their satisfaction with the tools and how they've facilitated their learning have been incredibly, incredibly positive. That last point might seem, on this slide, might seem a bit self-serving, but it really is incredibly important. You know, a lot of the questions that we receive day in, day out are material that perhaps we may have kind of explained once at the beginning of a module, but have not revisited it since. That they might be kind of what we would call kind of housekeeping information, and students may be unsure. Instead of kind of watching back, they might just think, oh, it's easier to email. But with how some of these chatbots can be set up, the student can just directly ask the question of the chatbot and get an answer. Now, of course, that comes with its risks. What happens if they give the wrong answer? But we'll come back to that in a second, based on kind of how we can program and how we can set up the chatbots within Blackboard in particular. Now, when it comes to their use, I think of chatbots existing to serve kind of different kind of constituencies, as they were. So, for example, you can have a chatbot which is designed as a more generic FAQ style device, where students can ask it common questions and they will be able to answer. Again, the ones in Blackboard, I personally find, are more well suited to the discussion around particular concepts, scientific, technical concepts, and getting students to work through problems than the FAQ bots. But I know there are other chatbots that are powered by slightly different mechanisms, which other institutions are using for these FAQs. I say one of the ones that I use it a lot for are study assistants, where I will set up a chatbot to address a particular topic, a particular subject, and that will then work with students to develop their understanding and their knowledge about that particular topic. Assessment guides, module navigators, and the last one of things I'm kind of newly starting to use are kind of using them to prompt students to self-reflect. As a professional kind of course, self-reflection is really important, but students tend to not like to do it. chatbots can prompt them, and it's fantastic. Now, for barriers, as I said, by using the one that's embedded in the VLE, we're minimizing the learning curve. We're also minimizing a technical requirement on students, so they don't have to kind of go off and buy new equipment or new software licenses. It's provided through the university VLE. That being said, we are finding that technical literacy is a bit of a mixed bag, particularly with new incoming students. You know, we all assume that because they've got phones and laptops, they know their way around these different systems. Increasingly, that isn't something we seem to be able to take for granted. So alongside these chatbots, it's really important that we develop materials to work the students through these devices, how they work, and also part of it to help manage their expectations. You know, what actually are they going to get out of these chatbots? You know, it's not going to be Nobel Prize winning scientific discussion, but it is going to be stuff that will help them guide and plan their future studies. When it comes to the AI chatbots in Blackboard, there are two main modes: Socrative questioning and role playing. And I try and use both. So with Socrative questioning, you give the chatbot the question you would like the student to answer. You can then set the AI persona. Are they going to be helpful? Are they going to be supportive? Are they going to be quite kind of standoffish? And then by kind of tailoring these adaptations, you then release the chatbot and students engage with it. Personally, I find the kind of the Socratic questioning chatbot a bit like talking to my 4-year-old niece. Bless her, you'll tell her to do something and she'll just say why. You kind of tell her something and she'll say why. This is exactly the kind of the responses that you get from this chatbot. That's brilliant. Why? Well, that's good, but have you considered what else could be done? And it's just a way of guiding a student through their own learning by prompting them with new questions. So these chatbots might not necessarily give the student the answer. And that's why it's important to kind of, again, prepare students and to help manage their expectations. Because many students open these chatbots and expect to be given the answer, when in reality, they're just working them through, guiding them, prompting them so that they can develop their own learning. As you can see, you can even set the complexity of the responses so that they're fairly low level or fairly high level responses. But as I said, the Socratic questioning will rarely give the student the answer. They'll just guide them to developing it on their own. This screenshot just shows an example of the work student has done with the Socratic questioning. The student responses in purple. So you can see the student has attempted to answer, and then the Socratic questioning bot has just kind of come through with another question. And these will go on effectively until the student tires. And the good thing with these, and again, I make this clear to students, is that as it's embedded in the VLE, I can see everything that's going on. And I only had to have one conversation about, inappropriate comments being made to the AI. Everybody else has been using it very responsibly and have taken a benefit. The second type, and this is the one I use for a lot more of the kind of applied complex modules, is the role-playing persona, where you can set quite complex scenarios. And in this case, I have patients with leukemia. And as part of the chatbot, as part of this assignment, the chatbot will effectively work through these different case studies and prompt the student to really, really engage with the material. And as you can see, again, purple responses are the student, the unhighlighted responses are the AI. You can see that the responses from the AI in these role-playing ones are far more comprehensive. Again, they won't give the student the answer, but they'll give them a far more structured way of approaching their own learning. Again, these will go on for as long as the students feel a benefit of it. I'm actually embedding this particular chatbot now in an assignment I run with students. The assignment as it's previously ran, I pretend to be a patient, students make an appointment to talk with me, and I answer them. Incredibly time consuming, but it also means students can't work on this assignment at 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever. By changing it so that instead of talking with me, they can get a lot of the information from the AI chatbot, it frees up my time. Yes, of course it does. That's the mercenary aspect of it. But it increases the flexibility on the students so much so that they can fit the assignment around their lives rather than having to try, particularly with group work, rather than trying to kind of herd cats and get everybody in the room at the same time I am. As a shout out to kind of other AI, I find the use of AI to come up with these scenarios, so Copilot, ChatGPT, is incredibly effective. So that massive case study for the role-playing one was completely generated by ChatGPT. And it's just using the tools available to basically try and reduce the amount of time setting these things up takes. And at the end of the day, one can only hope that one AI will understand another AI very, very well and know how to word the prompts correctly. So from a conclusion perspective, student engagement does vary, but the ones who do enjoy it. Thank you very much.
That's excellent timing. Well done. Spot on. Thank you very much, Dylan. Loads of things in the chat to keep an eye on and maybe respond to as we go into our next session. And I'm going to pass over to Rosemary now to introduce Roddy and Alex.
So it's my pleasure to introduce Roddy Monroe and Alex Umsden from Heriot-Watt Online. And they're two fantastic learning designers, and they're going to share their practice in global online learning. So I'll hand over to Roddy and Alex.
Thank you, Rosemary, for such a lovely introduction. I'll just share my screen. Okay. So yes, we are Alex Lumsden and Roddy Monroe, and we are learning designers at Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh. And today we're talking about potentially a very simple idea, which is designing online activities that actually invite students to step away from the screen. And so as a bit of background, our team is the digital education team, and we work with schools from all across the university to develop fully online courses and programs for our, as Rosemary says, a global student base. And we have students in more than 160 countries. And by fully online, we mean that these courses are fully asynchronous and self-paced. And this model has obvious benefits for our students, so it allows them to fit their study around their work and other commitments, but it also has challenges for the students and for us in the way we approach designing activities. So firstly, because the students don't move through the materials at the same pace, this means that any sort of collaborative or group work can be problematic. And we found, in fact, that even really simple discussions can fall flat because they're not always in the same space at the same time. And once they've participated, they don't always come back and revisit those sorts of activities. There's also a limited synchronous tutor presence, which can make it harder to create that sense of connection with students and to help with their motivation. And in general, not having that sort of structure of perhaps weekly scheduled sessions, we know that our students can struggle to maintain their motivation, and we sometimes struggle to sustain their engagement with our activities. So this means we have to work extra hard to make the activities appeal to our students. And what we found sort of through trial and error over the years is that the activities that prove to be the most successful within this sort of delivery environment meet these four criteria. So firstly, meaningful. So we like to think hard about what is the benefit to students of participating in activity? Why should they do it? We know that they probably won't participate if they don't perceive any value in it. Secondly, we want them to be engaged. We want the activity really to hold their attention. And we also preferably want them to enjoy it or even have some fun along the way. Third, we want it to be, we want it to be accessible. So by this, I mean we want to minimize any unnecessary barriers to participation. We really don't want students to feel like it's a chore to participate, or that it's going to be really hard to get started, because we know that they don't have that tutor on hand to help them out with that. And finally, we like to think about their well-being. So we want students to feel that it's a positive experience to participate in activities, and it makes them feel good and promotes their well-being. And an approach that we've found has proven particularly effective and that addresses these 4 needs is to actually design activities that ask students to move away from their screens completely and do something practical and hands-on in the real world. And today, we're going to showcase just one activity taken from the course Workplace Design and Human Factors on our fully online MSc in Business and Organisational Psychology. Now, our academic course author for this course was Greg Fantham, and I believe Greg may have sneaked in today, so I'll have to be careful what I say. But in truth, we only have great things to say about Greg. He was such a pleasure to work with. He brought so much energy and, above all, creativity to the design of his activities. Greg was a high school teacher for many years before moving into higher education, and I think that's really shows in the way that he designs activities. And it's really important to say that the activity we're showcasing today was entirely Greg's idea, and all of the activities across the courses he worked on, really came from Greg. And we want to stress that all we did was help him make it work in an online environment. And really, we couldn't have done this sort of activity design without Greg and his creativity. And just to give you an idea of Greg's vision for the course and these activities, here's a sort of word cloud of some of the things that Greg said about his vision. So because workplace design, the subject of the course, is all about the human in the loop in the workplace, it's about active participation. He wanted these activities to be really practical, based on real-time scenarios, authentic, and he wanted the activities to have a sort of DIY feel that was quite fun. He wanted students to be using bits of paper and string and really experimenting. And overall, he said that he wanted the course to feel like an interactive novel. So I think that gives you something of the sort of vision inside Greg's fertile and creative mind. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to Roddy to show you an activity.
Thanks, Alex. Let me just figure out how to share. Hopefully that's me sharing now. So, yeah, as Alex said, Greg was fantastic to work with. Whether he was coming up with something fictional or basing activities on real life events, situations, he was consistently able to throw students into these activities in an interesting and fun way. So on that note, this is the end of module task from module 1, titled Airship Tours of the Antarctic. So we want to show what happens when creative ideas meet the pedagogy of away from the screen activity design. So to read out the description briefly, the main task for the module is to design and test a full-size paper prototype of a control panel to be used by the excursion manager on an airship. So we really love this activity. It's hands-on. It gets the student away from the screen and making something. So you'll have noticed we're in module 1. We're pretty much at the start of the course. The student doesn't have a breadth of knowledge of the subject area. Instead, their lack of knowledge is actually their greatest strength in this task. So they get to create something based on their first instincts and are given the opportunity to improve and refine on their initial design as they progress through the activity and through the course itself. Something crucial to mention here is that of purpose. So we find it important to explain to the student not just what they should do in a given activity, but why they should do it, making it meaningful. Online activities don't have the on-campus benefit of a captive audience. And our activities of these type are all formative, so no marks are awarded. We need to offer a really good reason why a student should spend their valuable time on them. So in this case, we're asking the student to develop skills and build experience, to give them an understanding of both the difficulty and the iterative nature of workplace design. So let's scroll down a little bit. So we immediately want to give the student the resources they'll need to build a picture of what's expected of them in this activity. So starting at a quite basic level, maybe students don't know what an airship is. So what does an airship look like inside? What does it look like when it flies? Scrolling down a little more, we want to show them this type of thing the student could create. So we tend to use a combination of in-house and external resources. In this case, a YouTube video does a perfectly good job of conveying what's needed as a visual example. Then If the student would like, they can print out the constituent elements of that panel at home. So you can see we've got some relatively crudely drawn components they can cut out. If they don't have access to a printer, then hand-drawn is more than fine. So continuing on, we continue to build up that picture of what's needed. A video created by Greg showing how he designed his control panel. If I remember correctly, this was shot on fairly basic equipment, maybe an iPhone or a standard video camera. So by creating in this way, we demonstrate to the student that we don't need anything too polished here. The one thing we do insist on is high audio quality, high standards of clarity and volume for universal design. And we also have fully accessible transcripts downloadable for our in-house media too. So now the students have a mental image of what they're designing for. We jump into the activity itself. And there are 3 steps to this. Number 1 is the design brief. So the student, following instructions in the design brief, creates their optimal configuration for the control panel using whatever methods they feel comfortable with. There's plenty of advice to help them make sound design decisions here. They then crucially take a photograph of that initial configuration, or if they wish to, record the process on video. Leading into step 2, the user trial. At this point, they listen to a piece of audio from a provided scenario, which allows them to try out their design in real time. I'm just playing without audio here, but you can see the closed captions running. So this is to be treated as live by the student. They play the audio, they use their control panel in response to the situation as it plays out. And they will notice, unless they got really, really lucky, that their initial design probably hasn't functioned quite as well in practice as they would have hoped. So at this stage, it's time for them to adapt to their design based on the findings of their user trial. Now, step 3 is what we really wanted to share today. So just going to share some of our favorite student submissions from this task. When you design an activity, you hope it works, that it'll encourage students to engage. There's always a risk it falls flat or doesn't quite work. But on this occasion, we were really quite blown away by the responses from our students. We use Padlets for responses. We've got an institutional license for Padlet. But the main reason we wanted to use that is the types of files it accepts. It gave the students a little more freedom on what they could create. So whether it's audio, video, image, PDF, PowerPoint, they can add that to a Padlet, and the way it's displayed is quite nice too. So just to show a bit of a range of excuse me a second, I'll just tab into the next tab. So yeah, just to show a range of the different examples. This one's a little more lo-fi, where a student has hand-drawn the control panel. It's not the most visually arresting example, but crucially, the student has done everything we've asked of them. They've got their initial design on the left, they've got their revised design on the right, and they've got description of what they did during the task on the right-hand side. I'll just tab along again to the next one. So this student takes a slightly different approach. They've got a short PowerPoint deck. You can see that the students used the PDF display components that we provided to build their control panel. So slide 1 is their initial design photo with these detailed text boxes with the design rationale. And if we move on to slide 2, that's the redesign with text explanation as to why they made the adaptations that they did. So this next example is probably a bit more of what we might have expected most of the students to do. So it also utilizes the PDF we provided with the control panel components. And as you can see from the original on top, the students had a good go at the layout, including the toilet roll joystick. What we love about this one is the level of detail the students gone into with their revision. So they've moved the buttons to a more convenient location. They've coloured the buttons in and to relate to the function of those buttons. They've reduced the size of the joystick to increase visibility of the entire workspace. And they've gone into some really fantastic detail, as you can see on the right-hand side here. I think they've got 10 points to describe the changes that they've made from the original to the revised panel. And finally, I wanted to show our first video submission for this task. So we weren't entirely sure if anyone would want to create video. So we were pleasantly surprised when this was submitted. So the student talks through their initial design, and if we just run on a little bit, so this is fully narrated, and you can see that the student has used some on-screen graphics to highlight specific areas and to justify the design decisions that they made in the before trial stage. And then if we just skim along a bit, they do exactly the same with their post-trial changes. So adding overlay graphics and narrated descriptions describing what they had done. So for us, the range of responses and the differing approaches made really highlight how well students have engaged with the task. It's also worth saying that at a number of points throughout the course, the student returns to this task. So at the end of Module 2, they can choose to evaluate their design against user experience principles. At the end of Module 3, they use it to conduct a user trial with an external participant. And ultimately, they can use it as the basis of one of the main assessment pieces of their course, the user research briefing. So I'll pass back over to Alex to wrap things up now.
Okay, I'll just share my slides again. So quickly, so we think we've had such great engagement and feedback from students on this activity because we hit those 4 points I mentioned at the start. It's meaningful, engaging, accessible, and fosters their well-being, asking them to step away from the screen and do something a bit different. So our key takeaways, we would say don't assume that all online learning has to happen at the screen. You know, clearly you can develop really effective and memorable activities that can be done completely offline. But that comes with the caveat that time and resources are key. Obviously, this is quite an involved activity. We're very lucky to have a great in-house media team who did a lot of work on this. And we've also worked with some great academics like Greg. And it's not always the case that you have the time and resources to do something like this. But we would say try something new. You may find students respond well to it. I think, as Roddy suggested, we weren't sure how students were going to react to these activities at all, but really they've been the most successful activities, probably across all the programs that we've produced. And finally, perhaps as a bonus, we suspect that these sort of multi-stage, highly interactive physical activities may be a bit more AI resistant. So I think you could use AI perhaps to help you with this task, but it would be tricky. And I think it's much more fun if you just do it yourself and get hands-on. So just to finish up with a reflective question for you all, we would invite you to think about how you might develop an activity like this away from the screen for your subject area. Thank you.
Again, perfect timing, really pleased, and loads of really positive comments in there. And I love that combination that we've had between the two, the two very different presentations. The one where AI saving Dylan loads of time and giving students a brilliant experience. But then this AI proof version, which is a fantastic way of looking at how students will be able to bring out all kinds of skills and creativity to this, but it'll be very hard for them to cheat. So thank you very much for that. There's lots of activity going on in the chat, so again, have a look at that. This is our opportunity where normally we would open up the discussion straight away at this point, but what we'd like to do now is, before we open up that discussion, we have an extra special bonus for today, because Ron, if Ron's voice is still holding up, Ron is going to demonstrate. Well, I'll let Ron introduce himself, what he's going to demonstrate and how it ties in with what we're doing. Something that he's been working very hard on.
Thanks, Alistair. My voice is just about holding up, so hopefully it'll be okay. But in preparation for that, I added narration to AI narration to the resource that I'm going to share with you all. So if my voice fails or if I have a coughing fit, then I might just switch over to that. And it's primarily a self-access resource anyway. So many of you will know that we use Xerte as part of the Future Teacher project. Xerte is a free and open source tool. And so my primary purpose today was to share a couple of announcements, off the press announcements, regarding Xerte, but also to share an example that demonstrates some of the functionality of what one of those announcements is about, which is basically AI integration, and to share some example content related to the subject today of designing effectively learning objects with Xerte, or some of it is generic and not specific to Xerte. So in the panel here that I added to the resource, there's a link to my learning object. There was an announcement yesterday at Dutch conference, and thankfully they've quickly put the recording together, so you can view a recording of that and also the learning object they shared. Some of that they end up speaking in Dutch, but much of it is in English and will be okay. As I mentioned, I've recorded narration or used text-to-speech narration for the object I'm going to show with you, and I used an AI tool called Narrakeet for that. Some of you may know that, and there are obviously other tools. So this is my learning object. As I say, it's partly an announcement, partly an example, partly of a demonstration of some of the functionality that's coming. There's a narration bar at the bottom of each screen, where you can turn on the narration and hear that.
Welcome to this Xerte example, including a...
But because Xerte is fully accessible, if I'm using Edge here, if I was to
Future Teacher, designing and creating online learning activities and resources with Xerte.
Your own preferred voice to read everything out on screen as well. There's an important note here, because I'm sure some of you, and probably Lillian, will say there's way too much text in this resource. It isn't meant to be the best of examples of Xerte resources. It's meant to be to share some information with you, and it isn't PowerPoint, so I make no excuses for including lots of text in the resource. And there's, as I say, there's narration, and even on the narration bar you can pop up the text from that I've used to generate that narration. There's a jokey point here that Xerte remains one of the best kept secrets. It's used by hundreds of organizations and thousands of authors and teachers, and if not millions of learners, but yet many organizations don't do that. And one of the things I would say about that is sometimes, unfortunately, learning technologists are the barrier to adoption of Xerte, because they have their preferred tools. Really, Xerte is positioned for everyone in the organization to be able to use it regardless of specialist tools. So you can access all of that. There's some demonstration of new functionality here. So if I'll skip past my involvement with Xerte, but you can read that in your own time. And the two announcements, one is that we should have, but are about to release Xerte 3.14, and there's a link to the release notes there. And the other more important announcement is there will be an AI connected Xerte release due in September 25. There's that same link to the recording from the announcement yesterday, and the same link to the learning object that they used to demonstrate that. If I quickly point that up, so that you'll see in the recording, if you watch it, that's what they a couple of quick key points is that AI will not be forced upon you. It's optional, and indeed you won't be able to use it until whoever looks after your organization has decided what models and what services to enable. There's a page that talks about the assistive tools. So as well as AI, there's this notion of having a quick fill panel. And if I quickly open the GIF that I created, you'll see that this is adding a quiz page, and then using the quick fill option that you'll see on gets added right now, and you just tell it how many number of questions and how many answers you want. Click the quick fill button, and you've suddenly got the structure, or you immediately got the structure on the left hand side that you then select each option and populate it manually. There's also something people have asked for a long time, the ability to add media directly to search for and locate media. So this is another assistant. You can choose which tool to use, which service to use, give it a prompt, and what you're seeing here is working without AI, but you can enable AI, and you can also enable AI to generate AI generated images as well. So if you use AI, what you'll get is this kind of thing where you choose which model to use, you give it the subject title, some instructions, you've got some options as to whether to use the learning object or to use the model or to use some context resources that you've uploaded, and to upload a file directly. And then the rest of this object is basically a quick example fed by our topic for today and the publicity we sent out. So this, all of the text you're seeing on the page here is generated automatically by AI based on the subject heading of designing and creating learning objects. And then there's another one here that's more specific to Xerte, which again the model has just gleaned that information from across the web or from its data bank. Some of the pages in here are not AI generated. This one is, and so the feedback here, the response is generated by AI, although I've added a note. And you'll get the idea. You can explore this in your own time. There's an interaction that's taken 2 seconds to generate because the structure and everything is all created by AI and populated by AI. You can, of course, and you are prompted to check that it's okay. And one of the things that I did was just to hopefully go through and remove the Z's and replaces with S's for the Americanization. But you get the idea. There's some interactions here that are created in no time, and you can tweak them and so on. So it's a very much a time-saving enhancement, but also quite a productivity and training resource as well, because you're effectively learning how to populate Xerte manually or with AI as part of using it when it's connected to AI. So here's a quiz with questions about today's topic, another pause for reflection. And then for those that do know AI, you'll get to the end where there's a game or a crossword. There's various game type pages. And then when we get to the end, there's a summary with next steps and some extra links that I've added manually. And then a results page that there's no AI involved here. This is basically picking up on all of the interactions that you as a learner have interacted with. And if this resource was connected to an LRS via XAPI, then all of that data would go into a dashboard that you and potentially the learners can view and interrogate. So I've whizzed through that very quickly, but as a reminder, all of that is listed in there, including the recording from the announcement from the Dutch community yesterday.
Okay,
I think
then silence.
Up the general discussion, aren't we?
Yeah, and I think Dylan's not here anymore, but we do have questions I think that we could run by Greg, Alex, and Roddy. That's it. So let me just have a look. Well, actually, most of the feedback in the chat was just everyone really likes the idea of stepping away from the screen. And I may have missed this, but what was your impetus for using that as the guiding principle for an activity? Maybe Greg could answer that, or maybe Roddy and Alex
Aye,
had that discussion.
Yeah, do you know what? There was actually a really nice quote that Greg had sent on, if I could quickly find it. And I can just read it out for you. But really it was especially related to the subject area itself. So here we go. So yeah, so I'll just read this out as almost a direct quote from Greg, but it was a decision that the mantra for the course would be high-level concepts using bits of paper and string. So that came about in part because of the nature of the subject matter. Human factors is traditionally very practically orientated, while combined with complex and abstract theories of cognitive psychology, particularly when it comes to keeping the human in the loop. So an understanding of memory and attention is typically entangled with questions such as where do we put the lever and how big the button. So I suppose it just lended itself really well. That said, it didn't feel like something that was confined to that subject area of human factors. As we were creating that course, it always felt a bit like, why aren't we doing this elsewhere? Why isn't this slightly more of a standard thing and a thing that we could do in other course areas? And I suppose we'd kind of done little bits of things like this a little more step away, maybe not to this extent in previous courses of that program. So I suppose it was just a culmination of it being the right place, the right time, and the right subject to try something new.
That's great. It sounds like you're tempted to apply it to maybe some other modules you might be working on. And it's, as you say, almost down to the creativity of your subject matter experts. Have you actually spoken to others about it yet? And what's their response?
Try to think what else we've done, Alex. We've kind of moved on to new subject areas that probably don't quite. We're working more in the sort of computer science field at the moment, which doesn't quite lend itself to doing this sort of thing anymore. Alex, can you think of anything else we've done?
Well, just that last question, we haven't really presented on this elsewhere. We did present a lot of the media at the ALT conference 2 years ago. Is that right,
Yeah.
Roddy?
Mhm.
Because Greg had a really strong interest in media, and we have a really fantastic in-house media team, and we produced just some really fun pieces of media. One in particular comes to mind, which is about Formula One and problems in the pit stop. And so our media team created this lovely little piece of stop motion animation with Lego. And students had to watch it and identify what went wrong, what was the human factors problems, what went wrong in the pit stop. And just stuff like that. It's just about making things fun and a bit different. And that one's not away from the screen, but it meets that sort of the engaging, fun. I mean, I think Greg, I don't know if Greg's here if he wants to jump on, but I think Greg would definitely say that making things fun is really been quite important. And I think we've seen a much higher uptake in student responses for these kind of activities than we do for perhaps the more standard text-based discussion activities where students just sort of post and leave and don't really engage very deeply. So I think I've gone a bit off topic there from your question, Lillian.
You maybe picked up an interesting question from the chat, though. Mike, I don't know if you're still with us and want to ask your question yourself.
Yeah, fine. I mean, one of the good things in face-to-face is collaboration. So when we do that sort of activity, you can get a group of people and they can be cutting things and drawing things. How would you do anything collaborative away from the screen in an online course?
I think our particular model limits that a little. The fact that we don't really have, certainly in this program, there's no real synchronous sessions or synchronous activity that happens. We have a very I don't know how unique the model is, but I suppose it's almost akin to a MOOC where students don't pass through as a cohort. So the opportunities for collaboration become more difficult. I suppose one of the nice things about this particular task is it felt collaborative without necessarily being collaborative. Once those responses started to fly in, and students could see what their fellow students were doing, it almost created that collaborative feel without actually being true collaboration, which was probably a little bit of a surprise to us.
If I could just jump in there, I think one of the features also is that if you create an idiosyncratic task, something a bit weird, then that feels like a shared item. People, others in the same group, they have that identity which nobody else has. You know, if you're sending people into space, as we're doing the one with the human ET, where people were being sent to space for various reasons, and other things, an alien attack on an audio. There's all kinds of weird things that people can feel that they share, which makes them a kind of in-group. So even though there might not be synchronous conversations going on, they do cross-refer to it when they're making comments in the various comment sections that they have. That does create an identity. Sorry, I missed a bit there because I was chasing a bat.
I had a bat incident as well, but I won't let that distract today's discussion. And Greg, it reminds me very much of playful education. I've put a link in the chat as well, you know, that idea of connecting learning by using your hands and, you know, your physical self. So that's how we learned as children. So that's definitely something very interesting. But Rosemary has put the challenge out to others who are on this webinar with us. How would you do collaboration away from the screen in your teaching? I wonder if anyone else teaches online or works with online teachers and has been inspired by Alex, Greg, and Roddy to come use the mic and tell us what it's inspired for you. Well, I'm waiting for someone to put their hand up. Pillars said they'll definitely look at using chatbots, helping with student queries and Xerte. So that's really good. I'm glad you've got something out of today like that. Vicky, Creative HE, yes. Is there a link you could add, Vicky? That would be really good. I think people are busy making origami answers at the minute, so. Okay. Oh, thank you. At the risk of putting someone on the spot, I wonder if Dave Ford, I wonder if you've come across anybody you know who has made that connection as well. And Julie. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Lils. Good to speak to you.
Hey.
What was the question again? Sorry, I was only half listening.
Well, you're doing origami. And the question was, in your travels, working with lots of tutors, some of whom are doing online work, have you come across anybody that has done this step away from the screen, linking to physical activities? And Julie will be next in line.
Yeah. I mean, for those who don't know, my background was in sports science, and a lot of my work still involves the sporting areas. So by nature, a lot of the work that I do, I'm supporting a lot of governing bodies, and it's when you're working with coaches and things. So you're naturally not always online. But I don't think that's the question you're asking me. As in, you're asking more about sort of actually designing where you're specifically moving away rather than it just being a natural part of the thing. So off the top of my head, I can't give an example. I'm sorry, it's unusual for me, but I
have put you on the spot. To be fair.
Yeah. So I'll
Not
to
pass
over to somebody else. Sorry.
Yeah, Julie.
Yes, that reminds me of, we have a course about looking at sculpture where students are regularly encouraged to step away. So either looking at, say, cars in the street and how they can look sculptural, but also, I don't know, carving cream cheese or carving different materials to try and get that experience of carving and modeling. What else? Standing like a picture, standing like a sculpture, and see what the posture and how it feels and how natural it feels. So trying to have those regular feeling as well as seeing on a screen, I think worked particularly well for that subject. And I think in another course for social psychology, it's not, we're just working on it at the moment, we're developing it, but there will be experiments like this where students are encouraged to do like little experiments with their relatives or, you know, people they know, and then just reporting back or sharing a picture or things like this in the forum on the course, so that it creates that sense of presence and that sense of community, but it's also not just online.
Brilliant. I know in our pre-sessional courses, they often, it's partly to familiarize students with the city, but also to encourage them to interact more with people in the city. They ask the students to follow a bit of a trail and ask questions of people, take pictures of themselves interacting with those people, put it into a Padlet, and as well talk about that experience by typing it into the Padlet. So that does feel like a nice connection between the physical and the practice, and what they need to, and being aware of the reason why they're being sent to do that, and being able to reflect on what they've learned from the exercise. And again, this reminds me of another tutor. I think we've had them on Future Teacher before, where again, it was a management topic. Roddy and Alex might be interested in this as well from that point of view, where the lecturer needed the students to reflect on leadership types, and how people work as a team. But she needed them to experience what it was like to be part of a team in the first place. And when you're teaching 300 students, that's a really hard thing to try and make happen. So we got them into small groups to do an online escape game. So not physical, but actually it was experiential. And I think if stepping away from the screen's really hard, the next best thing is giving them an experience that they can then talk about, giving them an experience that makes them think about the theoretical perspectives of what they've just experienced. And the second year, we improved on that by asking a team to observe another team playing the escape room, and then the other way around. So you played it and had that experience of having tensions with your teammates, but you also observed other teams having that tension. So you had a lot to talk about, and you could link the theory to what was happening, what you were experiencing and what you were observing. So that I thought was really nice and rich. Andy Parsons, yes, absolutely. Everyday chemistry, absolutely. Experimenting with things in the kitchen. I don't know why GCSE chemistry isn't more useful in the first place. So Andy, do you want to come on and share, because you've got a very popular MOOC, including the smell of grass. I remember you talking about that at one point.
Yeah, just to say that the use of Padlet has worked really well on this MOOC. And when we set it up, we wasn't certain if anyone was going to engage in this process. And it started off with a few, and then it just went more and more popular, and it was fantastic. We get students to look at household spices and the antimicrobial effects on rice pudding. We get them to make molecular models out of household bits and bobs, and the creativity, imagination and fun, I think, just comes through. And as you say, it helps to make the subject more engaging, and really shows the applications of chemistry in the everyday world, which, like you, I wish was more evident in GCSE science.
Thank you very much, Andy. I mean, if it's possible to share one screenshot from the student outputs at all and add it to the Padlet for inspiration, or even just type up that, we can imagine, I think having seen the wonderful examples from Roddy and Alex of student output, we can imagine how that must be quite stimulating. Elsa?
Hi, I just wanted to share, to come back to the Socratic questioning type of exercise that we talked about, that Dylan talked about earlier. I mean, in humanities subjects, this is used as well. So even for a typical essay, you know, we can use the chatbot to try and really push the students further into their reflection. So, you know, I'm teaching in French, and the focus on the structure of an essay is really important in French education. So if you manage to input that into the bot so that they understand how vital it is and there's a set structure that you should follow, then they can really help students with that. And, you know, even have like checkpoints, and the bot asks students, you know, have you included the 3 sections that you should have in the introduction, or the 3 sections that you should have in the conclusion? And it's that questioning which the students should really be doing themselves. And before the age of AI, we used to give them paper checklists, you know, but I think it's more engaging and more interactive. So it's as if you were talking with a tutor, I guess, you know, about that. But yeah, that's worked quite well for even general essays. And finally, in translation, I'm developing a new translation module at the moment. We use AI for reflection. So, I mean, quite a few years ago, I think now most translation teachers have moved on from just asking students to translate a text, because obviously online translator tools have existed, although they're much better now than they were initially. So we add almost always now a kind of commentary, translation commentary that the students have to do. But what's interesting is in my module, I also ask the students to try and test AI on that and ask AI to produce the commentary on their own translation, which is really interesting. And when you compare with different AI tools, you get different answers as well. So it's quite interesting for students to realize that you won't get the same production with different tools as well.
Thank you for that, Elsa. That's really helpful and insightful. And we do know that Dylan received quite a few questions, but he's had to go. So I don't know, Sian, if you've looked through some of those questions and if anything else to add before we stop the recording.
The question, Dylan, does say that he checks the responses.
Yeah.
And he's kind of tested it on putting in kind of anti-vax questions, and it's come back, but it's refused to reply to them and things like that. I think in some instances that was further back up. But I mean, there are other people who've used the personas in the AI conversation tool, particularly in midwifery. I've put something like that in the Padlet. Julie Roberts in Bangor has also used the AI persona, where she set up a persona for like really difficult conversations that students will start to have in their workplace, to give them the practice of the first time they may have a particularly difficult conversation in a medical environment. And she's been really positive about how nuanced the response will be in that tool that's in the Blackboard AI tools. So, you know, we've got other people using the AI personas within Blackboard as well, yeah. So, but
I found it surprisingly hard to write the scenario, but that's just me. I don't know what was going on. But lots of people having to go, so I'm going to stop the recording here. And thank you very much to our speakers. Belated thank you to Dylan as well, and to everyone who's engaged with the discussion.